Biodiversity Lesson 1.2 Viruses. So when you think of a virus, you probably think of things like getting really sick or needing to take medicine or maybe even needing to take a vaccine. So while all of those things are true, scientifically, what actually is a virus? So a virus is an infectious particle, and that infectious particle could be things like droplets. So if somebody comes and they sneeze on you and they're infected with a virus, and if you're not wearing any protective equipment like a mask or gloves, you could potentially catch that virus from those infected particles. So a virus is an infectious particle that is, well, there's a blank. Is it living or is it non-living? Well, it would make sense for it to be living, right? Because things like bacteria and fungus, they're like viruses, and they're also living, so it makes sense for it to be a living thing. Well, in fact, viruses are actually non-living. And we'll talk a little bit more about why they're non-living in the next slide. The word virus stems from the Latin word poison, which makes sense because when things like the plague and the Spanish flu were going around, they didn't have enough information to know that you were being infected by something. They just thought that people were being poisoned by it. And some modern day examples include the COVID-19 virus, influenza or the flu, and the Ebola virus. So now here's where we talk a little bit about, is it living or non-living? So viruses are not made out of cells. They can't keep themselves in a stable state. They don't grow and they don't make their own energy. Even though they definitely replicate and adapt to their environment, viruses are more like little robots that come and attach themselves onto you rather than real living organisms like cells. So although they have living characteristics, we don't actually classify them as living. So some of their living characteristics include, well, they reproduce, but only if they are inside a host or a living cell. They can mutate or change, they contain DNA or RNA, but never both, and their genome may consist of only 4 genes or up to 100 genes, depending on how complex this virus is. So now here's how we examine their structure a little bit. So like I said before, they're like robots or like little rocket ships. That's how I like to picture them. It's a very simple structure with these pins or legs on the bottom, this tail that comes up, and then the head at the top over there. It's made of short pieces of either DNA or RNA and surrounded by a coat of proteins, and this light blue part is the coat of proteins. And this is called a bacteriophage, and it's the virus that infects the bacteria. And then to the other side, we have what it may look like under a microscope. So how do viruses actually reproduce? So we looked at that rocket ship, but how does that rocket ship infect other things? So it may go through 2 cycles, the lactic cycle or the lysogenic cycle. So we'll take a look at the lactic cycle first. So we start off over here with our rocket ship. And it's going to come down over here because it binds to a receptor that is a cell and allows it to just sit there, and it may inject DNA or RNA. And so the proteins become synthesized and it starts assembling into little virions or more rocket ships. So it starts copying and making these little rocket ships. So when the cell lyses, too many of those rocket ships were made, or too many phage virions were made. So when too many were made, the cell became full and the membrane ruptures, causing it to explode. It then releases this, one of them or a bunch of them, and they come back and they land over here, and the cycle goes all over again. And that's how you become infected with a virus. Now taking a look at the lysogenic cycle, it starts the same as the lactic cycle, but then it comes down over here and it starts to make new cells. It starts replicating its own genetic material and virus genetic material. Daughter cells make new cells which replicate its own genetic and viral material. So that's a little bit where it comes over here, and it splits into 2 cells, and it happens over and over and over and over again. Just like we had over here when the rocket ships were replicated, that happens over here. And then it comes back down over here, And then if it goes bad, it could go back into the lactic cycle, and which means it could start assembling new viruses. So this cycle happens over and over and over again. So let's talk a little bit about vaccines. So vaccines are what help us get better from viruses. So how do they actually do this? Well, a small amount of the weakened or detonated virus is injected into the person. So your body mounts an immune response against the virus, producing things that are called antibodies and memory cells that last a long time. So the next time you're exposed to the virus, your immune system knows how to fight it off before it actually makes you sick. Because when we injected you with that little bit of the weakened virus, your body had already been exposed to it and it knew the instructions on how to fight it off the next time. And that's it. Thank you for watching.